why I chop and drop with a blade rather than a string trimmer. Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. First off, I'm chopping and dropping to protect the soil and to prevent too much weed spread. So that before this stuff all goes to seed, I'm trying to chop it down, find out if there's any trash in there or anything like that that could harm animals. And the reason I'm doing it with the scythe or a comma rather than a string trimmer, because string trimmer would be a lot faster, be more energy, would be less work on me. I'm doing it with the comma because the comma, instead of smashing the plant and tearing it up into little pieces, actually just chops it off. It cuts it off at the ground. It gives me a nice even cut, and that even cut will recover faster. I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm cutting these things off like this rather than how a string trimmer will smash up the branches. And then these long pieces of branches fall on the ground and provide carbon pathways for fungal activity and other microbial activity. I'm leaving behind little stumps that will grow back, where a string trimmer often cuts too low to the ground. Now I can get pretty low to the ground with this blade. It's curved in such a way that we can cut close to the ground, and cutting close to the ground is better. But on uneven ground, this isn't going to chip up and make a big dust cloud. It's just going to basically chop and drop. That's what we want. Now, if I was bundling this stuff up to feed the animals, this kind of chop and drop can be grabbed in big bunches. Otherwise, I just fling it around to spread it evenly on the ground, because I want this to dry out, to act as straw, and to ultimately feed the soil. The more I can feed the soil, the better the quality of the soil and the faster my regrowth will be. And you might be saying, well, Justin, why do you want this brambled regrowth? One of the challenges about this property, not only that it has trash everywhere for some reason, is that it's degraded farmland and all that grows is weeds. But there is an animal that eats weeds, and it's called a goat. Now, I could have put a goat in here to trample this down and clean it up, but by cutting it off at the ground, dropping it in layers here, it gives me an idea to kind of look around to find the trash. And I've showed this little trash pile here. For some reason, people used to burn out here. And so this area I got to cordon off until it's all cleaned up. But so far on the other side, there hasn't been anything. Now, it's a little more caloric, more calories on my part to cut this down. I'm cutting it down, starting with the perimeter, and then I'm walking only over the part that's been knocked down, and that's kind of trampling it in place. But it's a little more work on my part, which is fine, because I can lose about 30 pounds. But my larger point is I can do this in the quiet. I can relax. I can get everything chopped down flat. I can still see what's going on. I've got a lot of movement for the plants. I can look underneath. And then I have these long carbon pathways. As that dries out, mycelium and other things can move the whole distance of that grass. So it's not chopped into, if I flail mowed it, which would probably be not a bad idea. If I flail mowed it, sometimes this tall stuff will mat, and then we'll have matty clumps. I do want this biomass to regrow. I want to cut it down to the ground and have the highest probability of regrowth possible, because it is food for animals. Now, there's little pine trees in it here and there, and I don't know that I'm cutting those down, but those will grow through. And so I'll have a good salad bar buffet for animals when they eventually get here. But in the short term, I can get the trash out of here. I can knock down a lot of this tall stuff. I'll be creating biomass, so you can see the dry material on the ground and kind of this webbing from the last time I chopped and dropped. And so if I do this 2 or 3 more times, I'm going to have for myself a nice thick matted layer of topsoil. And so when we get the biology correct and the enzymes correct in the soil, then the animals who are eating this will going to get the enzymes and things. Plus, many of these weeds bring up minerals and other nutrients that aren't readily available if the animal was only eating grass or only eating tree fodder. So I've got a variety of things in here. Of course, I'm trying to catch it before it goes to seed, because in the long run, this might be a garden area. This might be a temporary pen. This might be just something they graze through as they're moving up and down the roads. My agroforestry and grazing plan includes moving the animals up and down the roads and trails. So there'll be big chunks in the middle of the woods where the animals have never been, because we're going to tend to stay within 50 foot of the roads or the trails. And then after those areas are clear, then we'll start moving deeper into the woodland. And another reason that's real important, because again, I like to use mechanical tools and non-fuel. I don't want to have to store a bunch of fuel here. So if I'm using the animals to clear and I'm using hand tools to clear, I'm going to get the environment into a more manageable, with a lower input position. So I can come out here and, you know, do some chopping, put the animals in, let them finish it off. I can come back later, the animals will have pelletized all of this material, and now it's layers of material that fell years ago or months ago, plus the pellets on top of that. So we're going to add more nutrients to the soil. As rocks get exposed, these rocks will come out and go into piles that will later become part of a natural building project. I can, with multiple visits, get more accomplished than I could if I just brought equipment in here. And when I say more, we're looking at the energy audit of permaculture. So what are my inputs? It's nice and cool right now. I'm out here in a shady area chopping down brush. As soon as it starts to get warm, I'll go on and do something else. I'm using a tool that maximizes my regrowth. My regrowth becomes calorie inputs for animals. The animals are now mechanically removing the plants because they're bringing them down to the ground. And if I wanted the plants completely removed, I would bring in an animal that would till, like a pig, and that would till up their little root sets. But the goats will eat this down to the ground if that's what they're, you know, if they're in here for a little while. I can start getting the vines off the trees and things, cut the lower branches, use that as tree fodder, depending on the type of plant. Some of these plants the goats can't eat. And then I'm just basically cycling nutrients from there. The soil is getting healthier, the land's getting cleaner, the trails are getting wider and more easy to grow grass in. Because again, the tree, grazing the goats along the roads reduces the amount of time I need to cut branches and trim to get a vehicle through, but also allows more light into the forest floor to start those other layers of a forest. Because again, we're taking degraded land. If you've got degraded land, we've got a plan that works, and we'll show you it in this particular site. But what'll happen is the roads will get clearer on the sides because the animals will do most of the work. I'll have parallel trails to run fencing, and then when I'm ready to expand that, I'll be able to expand, just basically make another trail through the woods. And so what we're going to move towards is a silvopasture. With a silvopasture, this kind of weedy growth over time will start becoming more grass. So we've got, you know, more sun is going to bring us grass. And of course we can overseed if we want. We can throw seed balls in here to get a mix of herbs and plants and grass. But again, goats love this stuff. You already see deer trail through here. Goats will love this. They'll come and eat it all down to the ground, and then we'll move them off of it and let it grow back, and then they'll come back again. The volume of this, like I talked about in the grass videos, the volume here, standing up the way it is something that doesn't need storage. It doesn't need special tools. It doesn't need any special fertilizers or anything like that. These weeds are going to grow whether or not I do anything. The difference is we're turning that growth into biological activity, soil protection, additional growth, and the cycle continues. So every time that cycle turns, because there's such low inputs, and you can do this too, you can take a degraded piece of land and turn it into food for your family, food security. And then every year this is properly managed. Now the timing is important. We can talk about that on a training course, but the timing is important. But every year, because you're not putting a lot of inputs in, other than your physical activity, which you're going to gain in health and better physical shape. But because you're not putting a lot of inputs in, you're now getting an abundance of surplus from the land. This is a signal of surplus. This was just a little clearing in the woods that's come back in grass. Now, if widening the trails and clearing under the trees causes this, because there's seed bank here, that's okay too, because again, this is fodder growth that the goats can eat, where after a while they're going to eat as far up the trees as they can reach, and there won't be anything there. Now when the sunlight comes in, they're going to start getting patches like this over here, minus the trash. And so these patches like this provide food where there was no food before. You see, when it's completely shaded, this is what we got. And this is completely shaded under pines, and there's not much food here at all. But when we started using this property, we created trails. Now we start expanding off the trails, animal shelter and habitat. We have access to bring them water and to have electric fences up. And then what grows next? These weeds. These weeds, we have the animals go through them, or we chop and drop them, and we start throwing in seed balls to start establishing beneficial plants. Now, if we're using a forest model, by the way, the goats will eat all this stuff off here, and they'll eat all the way up to these branches where they can reach. Opens up an opportunity for agroforestry pollarding. But when all this gets knocked down, and we start throwing seed balls in here, this could be as easy as viney crops, as a food forest system that we allow the goats to clear at the end of season. We'll start establishing more favorable trees. There are some trees in here that we'll leave for shade, but over time they don't need to be here, and we'll replace them with new trees that we plant. So what we're doing is we're managing the ecosystem. We're shortening the time frame because we're not just smashing the grass all up with mechanical equipment. But again, there could be a time and a place for this to be flail mode. But we don't want flail mode right now because we want all this fast path so we can get the fungal activity in here. And fungal activity will help us break down this material faster. And then when the soil becomes more fungal dominated and small trees start coming up, we'll let those trees grow to about 1 inch in size, let the goats come in to get that fodder, and then we'll probably flail mow it afterwards so that we get coppice. And then we'll end up with more trees if that's what this ground's going to express itself in. I am pretty confident that all we have here in the seed bank is weeds. And so when we knock down all these weeds, we could trample these, by the way, but I don't know that there's not trash under here. We want to get the trash out. But so I'm doing the trampling, I'm doing the chop and drop, I'm building up the soil layers so that I'm making way for a healthy animal environment. That's the key. The animals will then move through the ground. They'll do what they need to do. They'll open up the woods more to let more light in. We'll keep the favorable trees, the oaks and the more solid trees, as the pines get shaded out. We'll move from derelict land to abundance very quickly. If you want to learn how to do this, if you have land that, well, you got to be careful talking about this stuff, because a piece of land that's derelict you can buy for cheaper than a piece of premium land. But if they know you can turn the derelict land into premium land, then your price isn't going to be as favorable. So if you want to ask us questions, we'll keep a secret where you're looking. But if you want to ask us questions, we can help you turn trashy mess into abundance, food security, physical security, a lot of value from very little inputs. This really isn't that much effort. I'm going to finish it off here before the sun gets to it, because the truck was in the shade just an hour ago. But it doesn't take a lot of work, a little bit of insights. We can help you. Visit www.prosperityhomestead.org to ask your questions. I'd love to hear from you. I'll see you next time. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead.